everything I had implemented was protected under the purview of my academic freedom, and that the university's position that I had subverted the purpose of the course could not be sustained by any of the facts that were before him. And so there was a law journal that reviewed that decision, and I believe the title of the article was Social Activism as a Means of Motivating Science Teaching Protected by Academic Freedom, Arbitrator Rules. So it was a big success, and it opened the door to professors to implement the grading systems that they wanted, to bring in anyone they wanted from the outside and any political point of view they wanted in order to teach whatever kind of course they had, even though it was a hard science course, whatever it might be. So it opened the arbitration ruling opened the door to that, but of course none of my MEET colleagues that I know of actually used it. And the university got busy right away changing the rules and trying to pass rules at the academic senate of the university so that no professor could just unilaterally choose to grade in this way ever again, you see.
So you're taking a view of education that it should encompass, questions that affect the whole broader society, rather than treating those in your classroom as merely being paying customers that you have to have sort of come up with $1,000 or $500 in order to get the ticket to the train in order to get in the classroom. You're saying you were trying to expand your pedagogy, expand your educational experience to include non-paying customers, and that was an affront and a challenge to the whole corporate ethos that prevails in universities in Canada.
Well, that was one component that they chose not to discipline me on. I mean, I have suffered approximately 20 disciplinary attacks, including the last one, which was my dismissal from my tenured professorship. So there are over 20 labor grievances that are in the works at various stages, and right now we're in the middle of fighting the big one, which is the dismissal case. And I have to say that from my perspective, we're completely winning that case, because the administration is admitting it does not have evidence for what it is advancing is the pretext that they use to dismiss me. So, from the purely legal sense, it appears to be an open and shut case, at least from my perspective. It never is, of course, because these are human endeavors and so on. But from my perspective, the administration is looking very, very bad in the ongoing tribunal case right now. This is obviously a long story, and we can't cover it in a short time. I've given you just the beginning back in 2005, but you have to understand that that is one small element of this story. It's almost like a train, and you've got different cars being pulled along. I've given you just the first element. But there were these kinds of battles with the administration over everything that I tried to do, whether it was have a discussion series in an auditorium at night to talk about social problems and show documentary films, whether it was trying to change how I teach in the hard science physics courses, whether it was trying to create courses that were multidisciplinary and that would directly treat the problems of activism and the problems of political agency of the students within the institution. Whatever I tried to do, it was thought to be highly threatening to the administration, and they basically found a way to close it down. Sometimes it took them years, other times they did it very quickly. But I tried many things, and it was that kind of a situation. Now, they would always do this with some pretext, and sometimes they would claim that it had nothing to do with me, and that the project itself had great value, but they didn't have the resources to do it, or it wasn't the right time, or the space wasn't adequate. There was always some kind of pretext. But that's the story of my conflict with the institution. What I found was if professors and students together want to define what the educational experience is, the administration will not allow that.
Yes.
If you're doing it in an authentic way and without compromise, if you're doing it in a way that optimizes your learning and doesn't necessarily please the administration, then they will not put up with that. That's considered highly threatening. And so they'll just shut it down to the, if they have to fire a tenured professor to shut it down, they'll do it.
Now
Um,
you were inviting Palestinian speakers into your class, and I know that you have suspicions that there was political motivations. It wasn't merely a matter of what was going on in the classroom in terms of how you were relating to the students and the broader community, but that there's kind of a macro political picture here that we should situate your debacle in. Could you speak to that before we get into the most recent phase of your debacle?
yes. I mean, ultimately I was fired by a new president who came in, Alan Rock. Um, I don't believe that the former administration would have gone so far as to fire me and take on the battle of firing a tenured professor who is well respected and loved by the students and so on. I don't think that the former administration, I mean, they were looking for ways to contain me. They were doing all kinds of things. They were even spying on me. They hired a student to spy on me for several years who was reporting on everything I said on any campus where I might speak, who was,
Oh.
who had taken on a false identity in order to infiltrate student groups and to follow me around, and this kind of thing. This has all come out, and it's coming out more now in the tribunal under the disclosure agreements. But so they did all this, but they didn't have the guts to directly fire me. They were just using the tools that they felt were reasonable. But this man, Alan Rock, he's a tough guy. And he is this high level politician who just decided, listen, this guy's trouble. We're going to take him out. That's my understanding of how it happened. And I don't believe that would have happened if I had not been a defender of Palestinian rights. I mean, because I was outspoken on that issue, because I invited, as you said, Palestinian speakers into my classroom, because I showed films that talked about justice for Palestinians, because I was attacked by various for example, the Jewish Student Association attacked my speakers and complained about my course. These kinds of things, and the fact that the new president, Alan Rock, is a staunch supporter of Israeli policy. I mean, big time. You can look at his record on that. I think that I don't believe I would have been, this is just my sense of it, and it's hard to have hard proof of this, but I don't believe I would have been fired if that element hadn't existed. I think this emboldened them, and I think it would have played a role, but you can't be sure. They don't tell you the real reasons. They don't ever tell you what they're thinking and how they're putting it together in their minds. Although we are getting some very incriminating emails and communications that are coming out these days, and more will come out on Monday of this week at the tribunal hearings, I understand. So a lot of this does come out, but the deep-seated reasons are rarely put in writing. The deep-seated reasons, you don't find those records, but you have to infer them from who's connected to who's saying what in subtle ways to who the bosses call as the first person when something comes up that is relevant to criticism of Israel and so on. So you have to infer it, but my sense is that really did it for them.
It's really astounding what you're saying, that Canadian students are to be denied one of their top physicists in Canada simply because that physicist happens to take a stance that conforms with the international legal consensus and indicts the terrorists, indicts the state terrorists and those who are engaged day to day in criminality, namely the Israeli government, that because that professor takes a stance on that, because you took that position, that moral and legal position in support of Palestinian human rights, that Canadian students are to be denied one of our country's top physicists. Isn't that astounding that this conflict, thousands of miles away, can manifest itself so frequently on campuses in North America?
Well, there's no doubt that what we can loosely call the Israel lobby has a large influence on many campuses here in Canada, and that it is a network of uniform thought in support of Israeli policy that is very strong. And, university presidents visit Israel and have ties, and there are donor ties, and there are more and more program exchanges with Israeli universities and so on. All these kinds of things allow one to infer that there is a kind of meta thought, meta alignment with Israeli policy. There's no doubt about that in terms of what you can see. However, the conclusion that I was fired for this reason is not easy to make in my case. I only believe that it was an element that tipped the scale to the point where they were willing. I mean, I think this is the first time in the history of Canadian academia that a tenured full professor is fired on a pretext that is for academic reasons. I mean, the pretext is how I graded students in one class. So it's an academic pretext. That's the first time that's ever happened.
Could you explain to viewers, international viewers, what's the importance of tenure and full professor? What does this mean, and why is it so important?
In Canada and in Ontario in particular, the law is, and by the law I mean the jurisprudence is, that tenure means that you have job security to the point where you're entitled to oppose your own employer. I mean that there's a precedent-setting case at the Ontario Labour Relations Board that established that. So the whole idea of tenure is that you have a kind of absolute job security such that you can never be fired for political reasons or for opposing your employer on questions of academics, management, collegial governance, all of these questions. You can impose your employer on these things. So that's the theory of tenure, and that's the jurisprudence of tenure. So to completely disregard that and fire me in this way without ever doing a formal evaluation of my teaching and grading, without ever allowing my peers to judge my work, it was simply a purely administrative move, is unheard of, I think, in academic history.
And criminal, potentially criminal?
Oh no, I don't think it's criminal. It's against the law. It's against the jurisprudence, labor law, but it's not criminal. They have the power to do this, and no one can go to jail over exercising that kind of corporate executive power.
I've seen you mention that your pedagogical method is actually uncontroversial in the education literature among those who are actually experts in the field of pedagogy and educational theory. The idea that grading actually hinders learning. I've seen you make the claim that that's actually not a controversial stance to take. Are there other professors around the world doing this, or should the University of Ottawa be embarrassed that they had you doing this approach in your classroom?
Well, among the researchers in pedagogy, it's not controversial at all. The carrot and stick approach is not how you encourage learning. This is I would say established, but in terms of the practice in universities around the world, it is controversial. So there's a huge difference between our state of knowledge about how people learn and what we choose to do. And I think the reason for that is that the true purpose of the university is not learning. If you want to know the true purpose of the university, you have to look at what the university actually does, not what it says. And when you study what it does, if you do an institutional analysis, what you find is that it manufactures obedient employees. That's its purpose. That's its societal purpose. And so beyond just obedience at the undergraduate level, when you get into the graduate and professional school, you actually have to go beyond just obedience training into what you would call a professional indoctrination. So where